Iniciamos este evento, les damos las indicaciones de emergencia en caso de que suene la alerta sísmica. Los integrantes de este auditorio de la fila 1 a la 6 deberán bajar hacia la parte de enfrente del foro y salir por la puerta que dice salida de emergencia y replegarse hacia la parte de atrás del edificio. De la fila 7 hacia atrás deberán salir por la entrada principal y replegarse hacia la zona de la fuente que está en el patio central de las instalaciones. Muchas gracias. La Coordinación de Desarrollo Educativo e Innovación Curricular les da la más cordial bienvenida a esta conferencia magistral que dictará la doctora Yvonne Steinert, visitante de la Universidad de McGill. Para hacer su presentación, le pedimos al doctor Melchor Sánchez Mendiola, coordinador de Desarrollo Educativo e Innovación Curricular, nos haga la presentación de la doctora. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Ruth. ¿Qué tal? Muy buenos días. Bueno, bienvenidos a la sesión. Siempre asusta cuando empiezan esto recordándonos de los terremotos, ¿verdad? Espero. ¿Para eso son las flores o qué? Bueno, muchas gracias por venir el día de hoy. Tenemos esta semana como profesora visitante a la doctora Yvonne Steinert, que viene de Canadá. Creemos que el recurso más importante de las instituciones de educación superior son los profesores, ¿no? Y estamos para ayudar a los estudiantes, colaborar con ellos, trabajar con ellos, facilitarles el aprendizaje complejo que requieren ahora. Entonces, dentro de las líneas que tenemos en la Coordinación de Desarrollo Educativo e Innovación Curricular, la CODEIC, queremos promover los conceptos actuales de lo que implica la formación de los profesores, porque esto también es una disciplina en la cual se genera mucha investigación. Entonces, invitamos a la doctora Steinert. Ella tiene un PhD, es psicóloga clínica, es profesora de medicina familiar y de educación en ciencias de la salud en la Universidad de McGill en Montreal, Canadá, y tiene además la silla Richard y Sylvia Cruz sobre profesionalismo en educación médica. Ella ha sido la decana asociada fundadora de formación docente en la Facultad de Medicina, ya está involucrada en muchísimos proyectos y comités, ha sido presidenta de la Asociación Canadiense de Educación Médica, es miembro de la Mesa Internacional de Educación Médica Basada en Evidencia y ha publicado más de un centenar de trabajos de investigación con colaboraciones de los 5 continentes sobre el tema de formación de profesores, de formación docente. Y tenemos el privilegio pues de que nos acompañe el día de hoy. Los conceptos que les va a presentar son transferibles a cualquier disciplina más allá de las ciencias de la salud y reflejan un panorama actual de lo que se trata esto. Tenemos programada 1:30 para la sesión. Ella probablemente en el transcurso de su conferencia les pida que hagan alguna interacción con los que están sentados al lado de ustedes. La conferencia va a ser en inglés, entonces sí, con confianza en cualquier momento, si quisieran que algo se repitiera o se aclarara o se los dijéramos en español, con confianza levanten la mano durante el proceso y los ayudamos a facilitar la interacción. Y al final tendremos un amplio periodo para preguntas y respuestas de ustedes. Entonces, si tienen alguna duda o pregunta, váyanla pensando, anotando y la tendremos al final. Muy bien, Yvonne, adelante.
Muchas gracias. And thank you all very much for joining us this morning. It's a truly pleasure to be here and an honor to be working with you in looking at faculty development in higher education. As Melchor mentioned, it's a pleasure for me. If you would like clarification in Spanish, just put up your hand, and we have an instant translator here. And if you speak Spanish very, very slowly, there's an 80% chance that I will understand. with that, I will be speaking with you this morning about faculty development in higher education. And as you heard from my biography, I have spent most of my professional life working in medicine and in the health professions. However, I feel that much of what I've learned there is transferable across higher education. I also work very closely with our faculty development team that looks at faculty development in higher education. Even closer. All right. Don't swallow it. It's really my eye-hand coordination that will be a challenge. Es mejor? Can you hear? All right. I feel like I'm having a microphone for breakfast. So with that, I also acknowledge that about 5 or 6 people heard much of this presentation yesterday. So the challenge for you who are here again today, you have to identify the 12 slides that are different. With that, the goal of my presentation is to really talk to you about the role and scope of faculty development in higher education, to discuss some faculty development content and approaches that are common and that can help us move forward, to discuss program effectiveness with you, and I would say most importantly, for you to think about which aspects of this presentation can be helpful to you. If we were together for the full day, I would ask you each to introduce yourself, tell me what discipline you're from, and what aspect of faculty development you want to learn more about. But I don't think that's possible in the next hour and a half. Instead, I would like to ask, by a show of hands, how many of you in the room are currently students at UNAM? Great. So the fact that there are students here will keep us honest. Students can help inform us as faculty members what we need to learn, what we need to improve, and what we're doing well. And I see students as future faculty. And in many ways, much of the content of faculty development, which is to enhance teaching effectiveness, applies to students as well. How many of you teach here at UNAM? How many of you are involved in teaching? Great. How many of you do research at UNAM? And how many of you are involved in leadership or administration? And how many of you would like to put up your hand for everything? All right. So whatever your perspective, please keep that in mind. I personally believe that faculty development can help us in our role as teacher, as researcher, and as administrator. But most of our focus today will be on faculty development to help us as teachers and as educators. And so I thought I would begin, before we talk about what is faculty development, why faculty development, and how faculty development, is really look at a question of why do educators or teachers teach? And what we did is I worked in clinical medicine for many years and was very curious why busy physicians, busy clinicians take the time to teach. They will always say it takes more time, I don't get remunerated properly for this, but at the same time, they don't give up. And so we did a small study in our setting to look at what motivates clinical teachers to teach. I realize that this comes from the health professions, but I believe much of this is true for the motivation that most professors in a university teach. And if there are any graduate students in the room who would like to replicate this study with a different population, I would love to talk to you about what we did. We interviewed 15 practicing physicians in medicine, surgery, and pediatrics in our own setting. We used an interpretive phenomenological study design, and we answered a question that honestly I have been struggling with for a long time. Just before I show you what we found, just take a moment to think, for those of you who are involved in teaching, as students, as researchers, as educators, as administrators, just think, why do you teach? If you had to answer that question in a semi-structured interview, what do you think you would say? I won't ask you to share that with the group, but just, I see some looks on your faces, but just think of what you would say so you can compare your response to what we found in our study. Because if we're going to engage in faculty development, we have to understand the motivation of our teachers. So what we found in our setting, in a small sample of 15 physicians, was the following. From their perspective, teaching was integral to their identity. It was an integral part of who they were. And as one individual said, even if I was told not to teach, I would keep teaching. So that was very interesting. And given that there are many students in the room, I would say what we also saw among these physicians was that they had been teaching from high school. They were baseball coaches, football coaches, swim coaches, tutors. So teaching was really part of who they were from a very early age. The other reason that was given is that many said that teaching allowed them to repay former teachers for their training. It was a way of saying thank you. And at the same time, it was giving them an opportunity to contribute to the development of the next generation. And as one person said, I want to be sure that there's a doctor who's efficient and effective who will take care of me. The other reason that teachers actually gave was it enabled them to learn. And many said, what is often quoted as to teach is to learn twice. It allowed them to keep learning, to keep up to date, and they found it personally energizing and gratifying. So I show you this to ask you just to think about, are there any of these characteristics of why physicians teach that ring true for you? And for those of you who are involved in faculty development, how do we tap into these motivations? So to give you a flavor, and then I'll ask if there's any questions or comments on this, these are some of the quotes that came up in the interviews. Teaching is part of my job. I think the difference between an academic physician and a regular physician is the fact that you should teach. So it's part of being in the university. It's part of being an academic. The other are on and on was talking about how intrinsic teaching was to who they were. It's a responsibility because they have to prepare the next generation of physicians. And as this individual said, it's a question of passing things on. It's a bit of a legacy. It's what I can leave behind for future generations. Prior to coming here, knowing that I was speaking to a much more heterogeneous group, which I think is wonderful, with professors and students involved in higher education, I presented these findings to colleagues in engineering, architecture, and law. And interestingly, their motivations were very similar to these. We now need to document that, but clearly there's something that resonated. And what they said is that we give back by paying it forward. So I wanted to share this small study with you for us to think about why we teach before we talk about enhancing teaching or improving teaching. But I will stop here for a moment and just ask if there's any questions, any reflections anyone would like to share, or if someone's prepared to do this study next week here in one of your faculties.
Muy bien, entonces ¿alguien quiere alguna pregunta o comentario sobre esto? Por ahí tienen los micrófonos o quién los tiene. A ver, con confianza. Veo una mano levantada, veo a alguien que quiere levantar la mano. Sí, esto se está transmitiendo por streaming, se va a quedar grabado, entonces les pedimos que cuando hagan las preguntas se peguen el micrófono a la boca.
Ah, sí. Ok. Bueno, mi nombre es Laura Morán. My name is Laura Morán. I'm a nurse. Y pienso que es muy interesante, o sea, cuando vimos el por qué enseño, ¿no?, en el área de la salud, creo que nos vemos reflejados ahí, porque además de enseñar aprendemos. Y para nosotros es muy importante no solamente la enseñanza que se da en el aula, sino en los escenarios clínicos reales, ¿no? Entonces, porque ahí es donde realmente aprenden las estudiantes de enfermería, ya sea del pregrado o del posgrado.
Exactamente, I understood that. And I would agree with you. I think the motivations among clinical teachers, among clinical nurses, among clinicians in any health profession are very similar. So thank you for that. I think the important thing, and why I brought this up here, is we need to understand those motivations before we work with our colleagues, our faculty members, and our students to enhance their teaching effectiveness. So thank you for that. Great. And then we'll move forward.
Buenos días.
Hi.
Yo soy abogada. I am a lawyer. I teach en Facultad de Estudios Superiores Zacatlán at higher studies. And I think that we have to change the way that lawyers teach, because in Mexico I saw that the corruption is one of the themes that are constant, but not in the good way, in the bad way. I used to work on human rights protection, and I really think that education is the only way to change really the way that the country goes. So I really think that we have a huge labor, and I have a commitment with my country, with my people, to try to change that. And the young people is the best way.
Right. Thank you very much for that comment. I agree with you totally. And I think your comment is a wonderful introduction to the next part of my presentation. Because I think whether you're in law here in Mexico or in law at McGill University in Montreal, whether you're in law, in nursing, in medicine, or mathematics, there is a need for us to continue to improve our teaching practices, our educational practices. And as I would agree with you completely, it's our investment in the future. So thank you very much for that. So with that as an introduction, with that as an introduction, we come to what is faculty development. So what I didn't ask with my questions at the beginning is I would say how many of you, and maybe Melchor you can translate this into Spanish, how many of you are involved in faculty development either as participants or as providers of faculty development?
¿Quiénes de ustedes están involucrados en formación docente como participantes o como proveedores?
Well, maybe we'll divide it into como participantes first.
Well, participantes primero.
Okay. And as providers.
Y como proveedores de formación docente.
So please, either hat works for this presentation. And my guess would be that more of you have been involved in faculty development as participants than the hands that came up. But I won't ask you again at the end. This isn't a pre-test, post-test. So here's one definition of faculty development that actually comes from higher education. And as you can see, it's an old definition from '78 by Centra. That broad range of activities that institutions use to renew or to assist faculty in their multiple roles, be it as a teacher, as a researcher, or as an administrator. And for me, what I like about this definition is the emphasis on renewal. It's not just about assistance. The other definition that Bland put forward in 1990 in the health professions in particular is a planned program to prepare institutions and faculty members for their multiple roles. And what you see here is an expansion of the definition of faculty development from the individual to the institution. And I ask you to think about how UNAM can actually be involved not only in delivering faculty development, but how faculty development can have an impact on the institutional or organizational culture. In 2014, I had the privilege of writing a textbook or editing a textbook on faculty development in the health professions. And this was the definition that I put forward. though I would tell you I was ready to change the definition the day the book went into print. The definition, however, is that faculty development refers to all activities, health professionals, but I would say all individuals involved in higher education, pursue to improve their knowledge, their skills and behaviors as teachers and educators, as researchers and scholars, and as leaders and managers in both individual and group settings. My goal was to widen the definition, that faculty development did not need to only relate to formal structured activities, and that it could be formal and informal, individual or group, for multiple roles that faculty members play. I also believed very strongly that faculty development can serve as a very useful instrument in the promotion of organizational change. In my institution, for example, our professors feel that teaching is undervalued by the organization. McGill is a very research-based university, and for many years teachers felt that research was valued, but not teaching. Our faculty development efforts work together with the institution to look for ways to value teaching, to include teaching in promotion purposes, to include teaching in awards, to include a recognition of teaching in what the university did. And for me, it was an example of how faculty development can influence the organization. It's also interesting to know what faculty development is in different languages. And I just ask you again to think to yourself, unless someone would like to yell it out, how do you say faculty development in Spanish? Anyone want to yell that out? Desarrollo de profesores? Formación docente? So it's interesting, and I'll show you the term that I was given prior to coming here, but whether we call it, I guess I don't know if for you there's a difference in Spanish between desarrollo and formación, but in my mind there is, between development and formation. And so what we call it will also have an impact on how we see it and how our colleagues interpret it. So I ask you to think about it. In the UK, faculty development has generally been called staff development. It's a much broader term than faculty, but they're changing slowly. In Canada and the States, faculty development has been the name, but many people have concerns because what does faculty mean? And I'll tell you the concern comes very strongly from nursing, where many of our nursing faculty don't have an academic appointment but are teaching in the hospitals. And our definition of faculty is it includes everyone who's involved in teaching. In French, I don't know if anyone speaks French here. Oh, okay. So one of the terms most frequently used, on peut continuer en français d'abord, is perfectionnement pédagogique. The term troubles me because there's an emphasis on perfecting and on the particular role of pedagogy. More recently, many colleagues call it formation professorale or formation professionnelle, which is very similar to what it might be called in Spanish. This is the Dutch word for, I don't know why it provokes smiles. I originally come from Holland, so for me it seems very easy. But the translation of this is the professionalization of teaching. And what I like in this term is that it takes teaching to another level. We're professionalizing teaching and we're professionalizing education. However, it doesn't include the multiple roles of faculty members. In German, if anyone speaks German here, this definition relates to both the personal and the organizational development of faculty, and is probably the broadest definition that I have encountered thus far. In coming here, I was advised that formation docente is the most common word, but it's interesting that some of you talked about professoral, some of you talked about desarrollo, and how you frame it will have an impact on how it's seen. I very much like the notion of formation, formation in French, but in English it doesn't work in the same way. And I've been told that in Portuguese, in particular in Brazil, it's called capacitação, which is capacity building. And capacity building actually could include all the roles. So I put this out for you to think about. But if you are going to have this university-wide initiative to further motivate, enhance, and promote faculty development, thinking about a term that resonates with most of your colleagues, I believe, can be very helpful. And we've talked about the question of who are the faculty. I believe it's absolutely everyone involved in teaching and learning. Todo, as you would say, except that many people feel for you to be considered faculty, you have to have an appointment in the university. So we have to make sure that our definition of faculty development goes outside the walls of a university. And then we might ask why faculty development. So our colleague from law talked about the critical importance of changing our education because of real societal concerns and issues. I ask you to think about why else do you think faculty development is needed? And why should your colleagues who are writing research grants, are teaching multiple courses, are supervising students in the classroom, in the lab, or in the clinical setting, why should they take the time to be involved in faculty development? And we need to articulate those reasons to motivate our colleagues and our friends to participate. We know that faculty members must possess and demonstrate a certain number of competencies that are ever changing. And at the same time, faculty development can help in the preparation of the acquisition of those competencies. We also know that those competencies must be valued by the organization, and faculty development can bring about change at that organizational level. This is one of my favorite quotes for why faculty development is needed, and it's as old as 1981. Westberg and Jason said, "The one task that is distinctively related to being a faculty member is teaching. All other tasks can be pursued in other settings, and yet, paradoxically, the central responsibility of faculty members is typically the one for which they are least prepared." I don't know about you, but this would be very true in our setting. When my children were young, I was very involved in faculty development, and I was often known as the workshop lady. I'd be running from one workshop to another. Until one day, and my children didn't like it because I would leave before they left for school. And one day my daughter said, "Where are you going now?" "Oh, a workshop." "And why are you teaching teachers to teach?" She said, "If they're teachers, don't they have to know how to teach?" So this came from my 4-year-old at the time. She's grown up now. She still hasn't figured it out, to be honest. In her mind, if you are a teacher, you need to be prepared for that teaching role and that teaching responsibility. And yet, if you look at our higher education system, most of us, unless we have a degree in education, are not prepared formally for teaching. So I believe this quote from Westberg and Jason is absolutely right on. And I think it would be wonderful if we could say it's obsolete. And another reason that we must invest in faculty development is that we must invest in our faculty members, as Melchor said at the outset. Faculty members are our most important resource in a university. Without faculty members, we couldn't have programs that we would be delivering to students. So I believe the reasons for why faculty development is important are numerous. One of the biggest challenges in the field is how to motivate people to be involved. So I ask you, here at UNAM, do you and your colleagues focus on individual change from faculty development or organizational change? How many of you would say it's primarily individual change, focused on the individual capabilities of the teacher? How many of you would say organizational change? And how many of you would say not sure yet? Both. I see a not sure, and how many of you would want to say both? All right. I believe there's a role for both. I also believe, and I appreciate the honesty of the individual who said not sure, is that many of our colleagues, especially those who are not here today, often don't know what faculty development is or what it can offer us as we move forward in changing the educational process. I ask you also to think about what faculty development content do you and your colleagues focus on. And what you see here is a menu of the most common areas that faculty development focuses on in the literature, both in the health professions literature as well as in higher education. The improvement of teaching performance, the actual acquisition of specific teaching skills, learner assessment, and specific competencies that are related to a particular discipline. This is the most common, enhancing teaching effectiveness. There are also a number of new and emerging areas of faculty development, which include curriculum design and curriculum delivery, which also includes a focus on technology-based instruction or online learning, educational leadership, educational research, and very importantly, personal and professional development of faculty members. So I know that as UNAM moves forward and CODEIC takes charge in part on the faculty development initiative, there's a great interest in knowing what you would like faculty development for. And I believe we'll be talking about that a bit more at the end, but here's just a taste of a possible menu of topics that might be of interest to you. The other really important point is, what are the competencies that are required of a teacher? And I don't know if any of you have a competency model for your own skills as a teacher in mind. In the health professions, there are numerous competency frameworks for medical educators, for nursing educators, for health professions educators in general. Unfortunately, I have not seen many that are specific to higher education. And if anyone is aware of one, it would be fabulous for me to see. My colleagues involved in faculty development for the whole university at McGill do not use a competency model that guides their faculty development. At the same time, I think it's very helpful to have an idea of what's expected of us as faculty. And here's one framework that comes from the Academy of Medical Educators in the UK, but I believe it's transferable and generalizable to all disciplines in the health professions. And they've divided it as competencies in teaching and facilitating learning, in assessing learning, in educational research and scholarship, in educational management and leadership, and in the design and planning of learning, which is very much like curriculum development. So I wanted to share this with you for those of you who are interested in looking at where to start in the development of a faculty development program in your own setting, in your own department, in your own division, to think of using a competency framework that can guide your programmatic efforts. However, I don't know about you, but competency-based education is really the latest trend in higher education. And for me, a danger with competency is, where is the individual in all this? And what about the passion and compassion, the curiosity, the creativity, and commitment that faculty members bring? So whereas I encourage you to consider a competency framework, I also encourage you not to forget about the individual dimensions, the passion, the compassion, and really the curiosity and creativity that every teacher brings. So I would like to take a moment here and ask if there are further comments or questions, whether you think a competency framework could be helpful to you. Are there content areas that you see as critically important? Or is there another way that you might frame faculty development that might be helpful to all of us as a group?
Thank you, Professor Steiner. Two questions. Talking about core competency.
Sorry, can you hear in the back?
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Professor Steiner. I have two questions having to do with core competencies for faculty members. Mexico, one of our biggest barriers is language.
Is
Language, when we try to write an article, a manuscript,
Right.
and do research. That is something that I've struggled with for many years. I've never been able to find either a funder or a solution to this, but that is something that really limits faculty members' abilities to put their information out there because science is written in English. That was my first question. And the second question I have is
what was the question?
if you have any ideas on how to overcome that language barrier in a non-US,
Non-English speaking
English-speaking country. And the second question has to do with the new technologies that while in a way they've enhanced teaching, they've also decreased students' attention span. And so you have a student that's either with his laptop open or perhaps hopefully not texting, but I mean, I am old enough to know that when I was an undergrad, I could only listen to the professor because he was my main source of information.
Right.
And whereas now that has shifted dramatically, and I don't know how to accommodate progress on my age. Thank you.
Wow, those are two excellent questions. Are you free till 4 o'clock today? So I think the first about writing in English is a challenge I'm very aware of, working with many colleagues in non-English speaking countries. And I would tell you that I admire every single person who writes in English when English is not their first language. At the same time, I will tell you, even if you're an English speaker, writing is a challenge. So it's a challenge from the get-go. I don't know easy solutions for you, but there are a few that I have seen used elsewhere. One is to try to get an English speaker on your team. So to collaborate with people either here within Mexico or outside for whom English is not a challenge as a language. But that's clearly not all of us have an English speaker who's also a good writer in the office next to us. The other solution that I've seen is some groups actually hire an editor to work with faculty members. Now it's interesting, when we think of faculty development, we think of courses, of workshops, but perhaps something to consider is to invest some resources in finding an editor who can actually work with you. And the other one I've seen is using students, let's say, in your English department who want to, how do you say maîtriser, master English, and who want practice, but who might think they have writing abilities. So I would mostly want to acknowledge that it's a universal challenge, that I have been at conferences where editors are talking about what journals can do to be helpful, but so far I haven't seen any real solutions. But I would say even investing, and perhaps as part of the faculty development program here, a small investment to help people edit might be one way to start. But I acknowledge it's not a simple, it's a complex issue. The other question was about online technology. And I would say, you're right, and you're right. When I did my PhD, we also didn't have computers. I had to type every page, and if there was a typo, I had to start all over again. So I know that era, and I know the current era. I believe technology and the use of technology in teaching and learning is a wonderful opportunity and way to get people involved in faculty development, because I think everyone's struggling with it. I think students are struggling, I think faculty are struggling, and we have to find ways that work through dialogue and through development. And I don't know if someone from CODEIC wants to address that, but I know that there are a number of initiatives underway to work with faculty to address that. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you. Although I agree that the language barrier is important, I would say, at least in my case, chemistry school, is time. Our teachers do not have the time many times to get these courses or these opportunities. So we have been trying to create these online courses or something that they can do on their own time, because bringing together for a seminar is almost impossible. So the language barrier, I think, is important, but most important is time.
Yes. So I would agree with you, and I feel right at home. If I were presenting at home, people would say time, time, and time. So the question is there a creative way to find time? Do you have departmental meetings? Do you have lab meetings? Do you have work group meetings in which you could add an agenda related to educational development and enhancement? Is there a way that you don't have to take people away from their work setting, but bring the educational enhancement, be it a conversation about writing, be it a conversation about online technology, into your setting? And I think the most critical piece is helping people see the value, because I think when it gets to time, it's always a balance between our research and doing something else, between teaching and doing something else. But the more we value a particular activity, the more we may want to re-engage. But I acknowledge and agree with you completely. It's time, time, and time, and we need to find creative solutions to make the educational agenda critically important. Thank you for that comment. I think we'll take one more comment. Melchor, would you like to say anything?
At the end.
At the end, okay. Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, don't apologize.
Yeah. You just said that your daughter told you, why do you have to teach others to teach? In law school, at my faculty, we have that problem. We have good lawyers, but they don't know how to teach. And what can we do with that people? Because they are professors of generations that they don't want to change. They don't admit that there are new people as students that requires new techniques to learn. And what do you used to do in that case?
So we have lots of professors like that at McGill also. I think they're everywhere. I think one question would be, do your students evaluate your lawyers as teachers? Are the evaluations all very positive?
Well, the evaluations don't really want to prove what we need to know,
okay.
to make a change.
Sometimes I think student evaluations can be very helpful. I think no matter which discipline, no matter which specialty, as professors in a university, as teachers, researchers, leaders, and students in a university, we take great pride in what we do. So if we get negative student feedback, we want to improve. So that's one way that can actually enhance people's motivation. I don't know if your legal program is accredited by an external body. I know in Canada, if an accreditation body says that your students are not satisfied or your educational program is not offered in the optimal way, that can serve as a stimulus for change. And the other, I would say, is if there's a curriculum change or you're introducing technology, that's one way to motivate people. And lastly, I'd say start with those people who are interested. Start with what Rogers would call the early adopters. And you often see that enthusiasm builds up and other people want in on whatever it is you're doing. So I would say try not to be discouraged by those who say, no, look, I've been teaching for 30 years, I know what I'm doing. But start with those who want to embrace new ideas, new creativity, new technologies, and then see how you can bring others in. So thank you for that question. Melchor, anything you'd like to say before we move on?
Only that we share the same problems all over the world.
Right. They're universal problems. So I thank you. You're bringing up all the critical issues in faculty development. The issues of time, the issues of motivation, the issues of awareness, the issues of bringing in new technology. So you've got yourself an agenda here, I say, for my friends at CODEIC. We also need to know how to deliver faculty development, and these are the common approaches described both in the health professions literature and in higher education. And I think one of the challenges thinking of the professorial example that you're giving, is we always expect people to come to us. So maybe we also have to change our approaches. And I'd like you to think for a moment on how did you learn to be a teacher or an educator? And for those of you who are students, how do you think you are learning to becoming a teacher or educator? And in my own setting, we did a small study that looked at how people became educators. And in a moment, I'll show you some of their quotations. But I'd like to ask you, by a show of hands, if you were to pick one of these approaches to improving and becoming a medical educator, a clinical educator, a legal educator, a chemistry educator, whichever field you are in, how many of you would say it was through learning from experience? How many of you would say it was through peer coaching, coaching from peers or student feedback? Wow, very few. How many of you would say it's through coming to formal structured activities, such as workshops or short courses or seminar series? How many of you are putting your hand up more than once? Just one time, okay? Through workshops. How many of you would say it was through a fellowship or a longitudinal program or an advanced degree in education? Very few. How many of you would say it's through work-based learning, learning in the workplace? Okay. And how many of you would say it's through becoming a member of a community of practice? And how many of you would like to say it's a little bit of everything on this list? But what's interesting is that many of you put up your hands for learning from experience and work-based learning, as well as workshops and short courses. And what we see is that often our learning occurs not just through formal structured activities, but also through informal. So in our own setting, this is why our teachers told us they wanted to become, and this is how they became a teacher. By wanting to, by doing education, and by the nature of their responsibilities. They had to teach, so they had to learn how to teach. They also said it was by being mentored and through role modeling and observing their colleagues, by participating in faculty development or structured activities, and by belonging to a community of experts. If we think about how faculty development is usually offered, however, it's through formal structured activities. And we often forget about mentorship, about role modeling, learning in the workplace because of a particular job. We know that it usually involves people. So I was interested that you said you have some online activities for faculty. In our experience, online activities for faculty work if it's just before or just after an in-person activity. Most of us really are social beings and enjoy the interaction, enjoy the exchange of information. And so what I'd like to do is share a conceptual framework with you for faculty development that has helped guide some of our activities in this area. I believe firmly that much of our learning as faculty members can occur in individual settings and in group settings, in both informal and informal settings. And what we see in the literature is primarily in higher education and in the health professions is primarily an emphasis on workshops and courses, other longitudinal programs, structured activities. I personally believe that much occurs through learning by doing, learning by observing, and learning by reflecting. And where many of you put up your hand for learning through experience. However, we don't usually call that faculty development. And what we don't know is whether the colleagues who have no time or the colleagues who feel they don't need to change are actually learning, but we just don't know it. Faculty development and learning as a faculty member can also occur through online learning, through student feedback, and through peer coaching. And for some reason, I don't believe we take in student feedback sufficiently into consideration. In the lower quadrant, I would put learning in the workplace, work-based learning. For those of you who are health professionals, learning in the clinical environment. For those of you who are, for example, lawyers, learning in a moot court, learning through practice of the profession. For those of you who are engineers, it's through a stage or through a practicum. But workplace learning and belonging to a community of practice. And in the center, I would either put a compass, which helps us determine what type of development we need at which time in our own individual career trajectories, or mentorship. I was not able to find a place for mentorship in these quadrants because they can be informal or formal, individual or group. So I put it in the middle, knowing that it's bidirectional and that all this occurs within a context. So for those of you who are trying to see, how do I take faculty development back to my group, my division, my unit, my lab, I ask you to think about, is there an approach here that you haven't yet used? Is there an approach that you think could be used with those of your faculty members who are reluctant to engage in teaching improvement or teaching enhancement? And what I would like to ask you to do is to turn to the person next to you or behind you and just form small groups of 2 or 3 for 2 or 3 minutes. But looking at this framework and think about which approach appeals to you, which of these approaches might be new for you, and is there one that you might like to explore further? So I'll go back to our framework and ask you just to turn to the person next to you, behind you, whichever way you want to do it, and just think about what here is helpful to you and also what might be missing. So, vamos, we can say. In French,
Sí.
I would say on y va, and we have 2 or 3 minutes.
Ok, un par de minutos, platiquen sobre el modelo con las personas que están a su lado, qué es nuevo para ustedes, qué les gustaría explorar.
So if I may have your attention, please. For those of you who like to promote interaction in your large classes, here's the challenge. That's fine. So clearly we can't ask each group to tell us what they talked about. But I do wonder, was there anything missing for you from the conceptual framework? Or is there something that you wonder, why is it there or why is it not there, that you might like to bring forward? I see a hand, but no microphone.
Hi, I'm Kaylin. I work in Family Medicine Division, and we were really wondering that we are only doing one thing about all the things that must be done. So we have a lot of work to do. We also need more time ourselves and more people to work with us, but it's good to see this because it gives us a complete panorama of what we should be doing and which are the parts that we must be even learning to do. And well, we're really thankful and glad to be here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Which is the one thing that you do mostly? Workshops. And of the different things, is there one that you would want to try next first? Or you didn't get there yet? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your comment. And I think what you're saying is true of most programs that are involved in faculty development. And the goal here really is to stretch our thinking. Anything else? Any comments from students, from faculty, something that's missing or something you wonder about? Yes, please. This is Alan's exercise program of the day.
Muchas gracias. Mi nombre es Víctor Castañeda y trabajo en educación continua. Lo primero que quiero decir es que me sorprende agradablemente cómo los planteamientos pueden ser trasladados casi integralmente a las humanidades y a las ciencias sociales. Es decir, cómo desde este acercamiento de las ciencias biológicas lo podemos trasladar a nuestro ejercicio cotidiano. Y en segundo lugar, lo que reflexionábamos en este momento de diálogo es la capacidad que ha tenido la universidad para atender de manera correcta estas necesidades, sin embargo, en algunas ocasiones desarticulada. Es decir, si nos ponemos a pensar este ejercicio, lo hacemos todos en nuestra vida docente.
Sorry, if I
Desafortunadamente,
can just stop you for a moment. I think I'm going to need help with translation.
perdón, creo que hablo muy rápido.
No, that's okay. I got it right. I just wanted to check.
Y entonces nos hemos enfrentado a que tenemos muchas respuestas en la universidad, pero a veces desarticuladas. Entonces, pues el comentario es ese. Gracias por acercarnos este encuadre que podemos aplicar muy bien a las ciencias sociales y a las humanidades.
Thank you. So I did understand correctly, but I wanted to make sure I did. Thank you for your comment. And it's interesting. In some universities, people find it harder to bring faculty development to the sciences. In some universities, people find it harder to bring faculty development to the social sciences. So it's really how you said, it's how we articulate the issues, how we frame faculty development. And I do hope that some of the members of CODEIC will be able to help you frame it so that it works in your context. So thank you very much for that. So what I'd like to do is really move through the quadrant with you for those of you who think that you might be able to use it in your own development. And I too started my work in faculty development in family medicine, where we also started with workshops and short courses. But as Clark and Hollingsworth said, and these are authors from higher education, the models of teacher development have not kept up with the complexity of the process that we are working so hard to promote. We also have to move away from doing something to teachers to involving them in the process. So I think a conversation like we're having today is wonderful, but more importantly, it's important for you to go back to your home departments, your units, your colleagues, and have a very similar conversation with them. And I'm happy to share my slides if you would like to contact Ruth or Melchor and even use some of the slides or the model with your own group with pleasure. We also have to move away from learning that occurs in discrete episodes to something that's continuous and ongoing. And we need to promote learning in authentic contexts. And I believe that's one of the reasons for changing our thinking about what faculty development is. If we look at learning from experience, I believe that's something that was clear to many of you. It's really learning by doing, but the reflective piece and the debriefing piece is critically important. And the challenge for us is how to classify that and call it faculty development and make it credible to others. We need to ask you and your colleagues how you learn from experience, how you learn from role models, and how you reflect on teaching. And there's multiple ways that one can reflect on teaching, and perhaps some of you use some of these methods. Is it an index card in your pocket? Is it a journal? Is it really dictating notes about what you might have learned through teaching? But I think there's multiple ways to learn to reflect on teaching. And we often underestimate the value of asking questions. Sometimes sitting down with a colleague and just having them ask questions helps us to dissect what we've done, to help us understand our motivation. And I believe all of us are willing to engage in conversation that often is based on questions. So I ask you to think about the value of asking questions as part of faculty development. And it's very helpful in peer coaching, or what's often called peer consultation. Peer coaching actually mimics what happens in the health professions, but it can also be used in law, in chemistry, in engineering, in mathematics, where you sit down with a colleague and ask for feedback on your teaching in a formal or an informal way. And here's a possible framework for coaching. Related to that is also student feedback. And I believe strongly that we, as university professors and organizers of faculty development, need to think carefully how we can better use student feedback to enhance our teaching. At McGill, for example, many years ago, we moved from lecture-based teaching to small group teaching. And it was only based on our curriculum development or curricular change that our dean felt he should invest in faculty development. Our teachers thought, well, I've been teaching, I can do that. Until we got student feedback that the small groups weren't really small group discussions, but they were lectures in small groups. And we presented the student feedback over and over again to our faculty members, and that's what motivated them to become involved. Clearly, everyone has a sense of pride and a sense of wanting to do what they possibly can. So I ask you to think about how you learn from peers, how you learn from student feedback, and I would say how you learn online is so critically important, but I would leave that to the future faculty development activities on online learning and teaching using technology. I believe workshops and short courses, as you mentioned, are common in family medicine. I believe they are the most common form for faculty development and don't need much explanation, and nor do fellowships and degree programs. But it does get us to the quadrant in which we had work-based learning, which is really learning for work, learning at work, and learning from work. And my question would be, if we were a small group, how do you capitalize on what you learn in the workplace? Do any of you, maybe just by a show of hands, keep a written log or a notebook or something where you put reflections on teaching? I feel one person. I feel right at two people. Oh, okay. Oh, that's the second question. How many of you keep mental notes? All right, more hands will go up. And I ask that only for us to begin to think of how we can formalize this reflection on teaching. In my own setting, I would get a similar response as you do. But when I ask people how many of you are on Twitter, many hands go up. So my latest recommendation is share your reflections on teaching on Twitter. Now, that'll work for some and not for others. But find a format or a forum that works for you. I do believe work-based learning allows us to learn in the workplace, where we do the brunt of our work. But the question I ask is whether we have created a false dichotomy between learning, and work. And how can we bridge that? So if you're working in a chemistry lab, for example, how can you bridge that divide? If you're running a moot court in law, how can you bridge that divide? How can you use peer coaching, guided reflection, logs or journals to promote learning in that context? There are many benefits of work-based learning, clearly, but we have to work hard to figure out ways to guide participation in activities in the workplace. There are also limitations, because clearly we can learn the wrong thing. And I think our challenge is how to make workplace learning more visible. I don't know in family medicine if you have to report at the end of the year what you have done for your own professional development. You do? It's much easier to say, I've gone to 3 lectures, 2 workshops, and 1 course, than to say, I worked, I reflected, and I observed. So the question is how to make that more visible, how to make that more credible, how to make it count. But I believe the power of learning in the workplace is really very strong. And then there's communities of practice. My guess is that each and every one of you belongs to a community of practice, if not many. But do you use that in your development as a teacher? I don't know if journal clubs are popular outside of the health professions. Does anyone here in the audience participate in journal clubs, where you, as a group, look at a particular article and discuss its merit and see if it's applicable? Not many. In our setting, it's very popular in the clinical environment, and we've now brought it in the educational environment. So we bring an article about online learning. We bring an article about technology. We bring an article to a group that's already sees itself as a community of practice, and use the discussion of that article as a way to begin the process of faculty development. There are many common features to communities of practice, but what I'd like to do is ask you to think about whether you belong to a community of practice, and how could you use that community of practice to advance your own learning. But just before we do that, I see a question here. If we could have a microphone. Right here.
Okay, el Journal Clubs son muy eficientes
Sorry,
para...
I can't hear you.
Journal Clubs son muy eficientes para la enseñanza y el aprendizaje de la práctica basada en evidencia. O sea, son muy útiles.
Are very useful. Oh, okay, thank you. That's what I thought you said. So thank you for agreeing with me. But I think we can move them from the clinical world, for example, to the world of higher education and to the world of faculty development. So thank you for your comment. So I would like you, again, to briefly, 2 to 3 minutes, turn to the small group that you were talking to and think about these questions. Do you belong to a community of practice? How can you make use of learning in the workplace? And can workplace-based learning help facilitate a community of practice? And we'll really only have a very brief discussion to see if there's something in the notion of workplace-based learning and communities of practice that can be helpful to you. Vamos.
Entonces, 2 minutos, platiquen si pertenecen a alguna comunidad de práctica y contestar las preguntas que están ahí.
I think 2 minutes are up. 2 minutes are very short.
Well,
Is
Mexican minutes are different from
Oh,
Canadian
are different
minutes.
than Canadian? Ah, okay. So my only question to you would be, are there any questions you had as you discussed this, or a reflection you had that you might like to share with others? Yes. Can we have the microphone, Ruth?
Well, hi, my name is Hugo, and I'm a student from high school. And, well, I think a great way for teachers to improve their own development as teachers is to have a lesson plan, because in a lesson plan, well, you have your lesson aim, well, your main aim, your subsidiary aims, your personal aim, and as you were asking us of how many do we take notes or take notes about that lesson, we thought, well, we thought that date, and I think having a lesson plan gives you a lot of feedback on your own, and also to have a sequence in your lessons. And, well, I see this as a tool,
Yes.
mostly in language teaching, but I think it can be really useful in every subject.
So first of all, thank you very much. I love having feedback from a student because you're telling us the truth. I would also agree with you that lesson plans, which in my mind I file in the category of curriculum design and delivery, are absolutely critical. I think my challenge is I take them for granted, and what you're pointing out is that we shouldn't. Can I ask you a difficult question? A little bit difficult?
Yeah, sure.
Are you able to guess which of your teachers have a lesson plan and which don't?
Oh, not really.
No?
Well,
I wondered if it translates into what you see in the classroom.
okay,
Can you
Y
explain
que,
it?
que si tú podrías identificar qué profesores de los que te dan clase tienen un plan de clase y quiénes no.
yeah, I couldn't unless they have it in the
Okay.
hand. Yeah.
Because I wondered, at home, our students complained for many years not about the lack of a lesson plan, but that the teacher doesn't have clear objectives, which is the first part of a lesson plan. And they were able to know which teacher had objectives and which didn't. So my guess is that something about how a teacher is conveying the information makes it clear whether they have a lesson plan or not. But I absolutely agree, and it's one of the basics that's easy to start with. So thank you very much. I saw a microphone there.
I will try to talk properly, but what I want to say is that usually faculty are working very isolated, and it's very hard to share with others because there is a sort of a competition between colleagues, for example. Here at university, we have I don't know if proper to say point scale to be evaluated at the end of the year and to get a promotion. And I have to say that sadly, when we translate faculty development like in the sense of formación docente, I think it's not a very good match translation, because for here at the university, the most of the people has a category of something like lecturer,
Right.
or chargé de cours. That means that people are just working to teach, and not for anything else. It's a very, very high number of people working like lecturers, and they are contracted, they are
Yeah.
engaged.
Yeah, and contracted.
Okay, to do that, but there is not a real, not formal, not informal formation to be a teacher. And there is another thing. For the evaluation, what it counts the most, is most important, is what you publish, not what you teach. And that is a reality of university, and not only here. I know that it's all where.
It's absolutely.
And, but here is particularly remarkable.
Yeah, it's more remarkable.
Because all the encouragement is for publish, right, and not to teach. You can teach and you can do very hard efforts to teach better, right, but that is not what counts. Even when there is an evaluation, people used to ignorate what you do on teaching. What counts is publish.
So thank you very much for your comments. And it's exactly for the reasons that you've illustrated that I actually put context in big letters around the quadrants or the model that I presented. And I think you're right. That's where faculty development needs to look beyond the individual. So I think it's a really good message to CODEIC, and look at the organization to see how can faculty development be integrated into teacher evaluation. How can the university change its valuing of teaching versus publications, and how can they be brought together more closely? So I thank you very much. I think you're right, it's a universal problem, but right now we're talking about UNAM, so we want to make sure we do what's possible here. So thank you. I think we have time for one more comment. Oh, I see 2 comments.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and then we'll do 3 comments, and then we'll move forward. We will definitely close as promised at 12:30. Aki, and then we go there.
Hi, I'm Elias, and I'm interested in languages teaching and educational science. And I want to quote Bill Gates when he says, teachers need real feedback. And why teachers need real feedback? Because we need to provide more knowledges, new knowledges. We have to coach, we have to train, we have to provide new knowledges, and that's why we have to get new feedback. And he says that teachers deserve better, and in the context that feedback is the most important factor in educational training, and I think our teachers deserve better. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that comment. I would agree with you and with Gates. I would agree completely. And I think feedback is probably the most critical aspect of the educational process for students, and feedback is the most critical piece of developing as a faculty member. And I think both students and faculty need to be trained on how to give feedback. So I would just extend the importance of feedback to learning how to give feedback. So thank you very much for that.
Gracias. Juntaré las dos diapositivas, la previa y el marco de referencia que mostró usted amablemente, que me parece extraordinariamente revelador. Allí habla del contexto, y ese contexto lo asocio a las comunidades de práctica de los docentes. Si las estadísticas no me fallan, 2 de cada 10 docentes son de tiempo parcial. ¿Cómo se logra implementar una comunidad de práctica en un contexto como el nuestro?
So can I throw that question back at you? Do you have, because it's a really good question, if we have part-time teachers and contract teachers and people, professors and people with research grants, how can you create a community of practice?
Did you understand very well the question?
I understood it.
Okay, thank you very much.
It was not an easy question. So my question to you is...
The Spanish.
The Spanish was perfect.
Okay, thank you.
The content is complex. So my question is, can you see a way of creating a community of practice in that environment where everyone has different time commitment, different emotional commitment, and different teaching commitment?
Entonces, si quieres comentar cómo lo harías tú, ¿cómo ves?
No, hombre, pues.
So I don't think there's an easy answer. I think the way to approach it is to have that exact conversation based around that question with your colleagues. Is there a day when everyone is around? Is there a lunchtime where everyone is around? Is there a 5 o'clock time where everyone can get together? And if not, how can you create smaller groups? There's no magic answer, and that's the only reason I threw the question back at you, hoping maybe you had an idea in the conversations that you've had. But that's why context is so important. But as I commented to the lawyer earlier, the other way is we often want to fix everything. Maybe we just have to start small. I'm also very heartened by the student presence here and by their questions. And if you, I don't know, what discipline are you from?
Civil engineer.
Civil engineer.
My master is in operation research and my PhD in engineering systems.
Wow, thank you. I have a lot to learn in that field. But if you said to your colleagues, we are meeting next Wednesday at 4 o'clock, or I don't know, you pick a time that works, with our recent students or with graduates who'd like to share comments on what we have accomplished, where they feel trained, where they don't feel trained. My guess is some people would come. And start small. Bring the students in. Hear the voice of the students to motivate people, and then find a way to engage their interest. Would be the only recommendation I would have without knowing your context a lot better. So thank you for that. And I think for me, what's so rich in this conversation is really the different disciplines. Because clearly the content in a language course, in philosophy, in engineering and chemistry might be different. But the approach to developing our faculty, focusing on principles of adult learning, for example, would be the same. The last part of the quadrants was mentorship, and I think it's clearly something everyone is aware of what a mentor is, but how do you use a mentor, which is a one-on-one relationship for faculty development? So I think what I would like to do here is stop at this point and ask for further questions or comments. What I've tried to do in the last hour, and really thank you for your very active involvement and engagement in the conversation, is really point out what faculty development can be, what it can accomplish, what its role in a university can be, and what its scope can be, looking at different approaches to faculty development. I've heard several comments both today and yesterday that maybe formación docente isn't the best word. Others say desarrollo is better, others say desarrollo is not as good. But I think finding a way that you can frame what you're doing. Maybe it's the professionalization of teaching. Maybe it's really becoming a learning community. You need to understand what works here. And I would also say to my colleagues at CODEIC, you've got an incredible audience here to help you develop the faculty development program for UNAM moving forward. So I'd like to stop here and ask if there are any remaining questions or comments. I think time, as what our colleague mentioned, is always an issue, so we really do want to end on time today. Thank you all very much. Muchísimas gracias.
¿Alguna pregunta o comentario final? A ver, Tomás.
Me parece que la pregunta que amablemente me hace acerca de qué haría yo en estos grupos, me quedé pensando en este marco de referencia y considerando la función de la CODEIC, creo que articular estos cuadrantes, de ahí podrían emerger innovaciones. Innovaciones que podrían atender las diversidades y el contexto en el que nosotros nos estamos moviendo. Gracias.
Thank you very much. And I think you're right. that an articulation of what's possible is really important, and so is diversity, because we all learn in different ways. And I keep thinking of the reluctant colleagues that you have and the reluctant faculty member. But I don't think I've ever gone to a faculty member and said, I have a problem with teaching, can you help me? And that person won't sit down and talk to me. And in that process alone sees the value of consulting and might come back to me a month or two later. So I think there's many ways of reaching our larger community, of reaching our professors, and I would say, please, use your students in a way to help you advocate for change.
Muy bien, ¿alguna? Sí.
Gracias. Es un comentario, agradecerle a la CODEIC que organice este tipo de actividades y que nos vincule a otras áreas de la universidad que no tenemos necesariamente la tarea de la formación docente. Muchas gracias, doctor, por haberlo organizado, y doctor Steiner, es usted maravillosa.
Con mucho gusto.
You're wonderful, you got that.
I understood that. That's why I said con mucho gusto.
Wonder Woman.
Thank you.
Bueno, sí, muy interesante pues la presentación, y creo que además también sería interesante que la CODEIC promoviera, porque hay muchas experiencias que ya se están haciendo dentro de la universidad, buscando precisamente otras formas de hacer formación docente, investigaciones que estamos haciendo también para formar a nuestros estudiantes, no solamente para que aprendan o tengan información, sino que desarrollen habilidades, por ejemplo, como el pensamiento crítico, el razonamiento clínico, la toma de decisiones clínicas, que son tan importantes en el área de la salud, y que hacer como un inventario de experiencias que se están realizando y compartirlas sería muy interesante.
Exactamente, gracias. And I think what we're hearing is there are pockets of experiences in the room that are working. There are traditions of people beginning to focus on faculty development, working in the area of faculty development. So I would agree with you, sharing those experiences is critical, and really building on each other's strength and expertise.
Muy bien, pues eso nos trae perfectamente a la razón de esto, ¿no? El señor rector, el doctor Graue, hace un par de años le encargó a la Coordinación de Desarrollo Educativo e Innovación Curricular iniciar la coordinación de un proyecto de formación y profesionalización docente. Se creó un comité de 1,5 de personas en la cual están representadas las 4 áreas del conocimiento, los niveles de bachillerato y de licenciatura, y de diferentes dependencias y entidades de la universidad. Trabajamos todo un año haciéndole una propuesta al señor rector para fundamentar un proyecto de formación docente, y en el transcurso del año pasado colectamos mucha información de todas las facultades y escuelas de la UNAM, enviamos un cuestionario a todas, tuvimos una tasa de respuesta más del 80, cerca del 90%, y por primera vez en la historia de la universidad, y eso me trae a la cuestión del contexto. Para poder aprovechar todas estas cosas se requiere generar conocimiento original sobre el tema local, porque el contexto es muy determinante de lo que se puede hacer. Y buscamos literatura científica publicada en cualquier idioma, incluyendo obviamente el nuestro, y no hay mucha. Y les comento esto porque nos dimos a la tarea el año pasado de hacer grupos focales con casi un centenar de profesores de los diferentes niveles y de los 4 áreas del conocimiento, incluyendo profesores de tiempo completo y de asignatura, para preguntarles qué es lo que quisieran ellos para promover su formación docente. Esto ya lo tenemos analizado, estamos terminando de editar un libro que va a estar en un par de meses, va a ser gratuito, de acceso abierto, los invitaremos a todos ustedes a la presentación. El doctor Graue escribió el prólogo, y en este libro les pedimos a diferentes entidades académicas de la universidad y dependencias que escribieran capítulos de sus experiencias de formación docente en la universidad. Entonces el libro va a capturar las experiencias locales, algunos aspectos de cuestiones conceptuales de formación docente, para ir planteando unas sugerencias, líneas que pudieran ser de utilidad para la institución en términos de lo que se requiere, porque como la doctora Ivonne nos ha dicho desde ayer, pues los tamaños y los números de la universidad sinceramente, iba a decir apantallan, pero también asustan a cualquiera, ¿no? En términos de cuando se quiere hacer algún cambio organizacional. Y estamos convencidos de que a los docentes se tiene que colaborar con ellos, es decir, no podemos, como decía por ahí una de las diapositivas, hacerles cosas a los docentes. Los profesores no quieren que tenga éxito el nuevo plan de estudios. Lo más difícil es que los profesores, como decimos, tienen resistencia al cambio. La resistencia al cambio es un fenómeno normal. Todos tenemos resistencia al cambio, forma parte de la condición humana. La idea es tomar esa resistencia al cambio como una virtud del ser humano y tratar de aprovecharla para poder avanzar en ese sentido. Entonces, les agradezco muchísimo su participación y su asistencia. Creo que afuera se puso una libreta para el registro. Aquellos que se registren y pongan su correo electrónico, les vamos a enviar las diapositivas que gentilmente nos comparte la doctora para que tengan las ligas y algunas de las referencias. Estamos a sus órdenes en la coordinación, y cuando se vaya a presentar el libro de formación docente de la UNAM y se comente más del proyecto, pues los vamos a invitar a todos ustedes. Y probablemente les mandemos algún cuestionario para ver qué opinan de este tipo de cosas, porque necesitamos saber qué piensan las personas. Hicimos los grupos focales con docentes en las trincheras, pero los cuestionarios los contestaron los funcionarios de las escuelas, ¿no? Y los funcionarios de las escuelas tendemos a decir que lo que estamos haciendo y que es nuestra responsabilidad lo hacemos bien. Queremos oír también la voz de docentes interesados en formación docente como ustedes. Entonces, obviamente con consentimiento informado, los invitaremos a participar en algún cuestionario en los siguientes par de meses. Pues, uno de los incentivos más importantes para la formación docente es el papelito. In Mexico we say, papelito habla. You need a document to say that you were here. So, this is for you.
Muchísimas gracias a todos.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias y buen provecho. Gracias por venir.